iTestify is about testifying of what Jesus Christ has done and can do in each of our lives. Through testimony of people just like you and through study of His Word, our prayer is to encourage each follower of Christ to be a light in this world. So let your light shine before men, that they may see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven. Matthew 5:16.
Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us on iTestify. Today we're here with Dee Casper, who is a brand evangelist from ARTV, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right. Can you tell us a little bit about what a brand evangelist is?
Sure. So ARTV is the Adventist Review's on-demand media platform that they just started, and the brand evangelist role that I have is basically to kind of better inform the public about what we're doing, increase awareness, recruit talent, and then oversee our social media stuff. So when I travel and speak, I'm also increasing awareness about what we do. So that's kind of my job.
Oh, that's really cool.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing. So
I like it.
We brought you here today to tell us a little bit about your testimony.
Sure.
How did that start out?
Yeah. My story kind of reminds me of Isaiah chapter 65, beginning of verse 1, where it says, "I was sought by those who did not ask for me. I was found by those who did not seek me. I said, here I am, to a nation that was not called by my name." And I wasn't really looking for God. I thought I knew Him. I didn't. But God came looking for me. I grew up in a home. My parents got divorced when I was 3 or 4, and grew up with my dad, basically. He had custody, was a single child in that home, or an only child in that home. And my mom got married and divorced multiple times after that. Just lots of instability in my life, just kind of chaos. And was just a mess as a kid. I didn't do well in school. It wasn't that I wasn't smart, I just couldn't focus, because of all the personal stuff that was happening. But I got into high school, and the only things I really cared about at that stage were drumline, marching percussion, and my girlfriend. That was basically it. And that was what my whole life was wrapped up in.
That's normal for a male, right?
I would think so, yeah. The girlfriend actually told me in high school that I can't be with you anymore. And it's like, this is a terrible idea. Why? And because you're not a Christian. And I remember thinking to myself, like, I believe in God. I don't know what the problem is. So I started swearing less and went to church more because I just didn't want to lose the girl. But I didn't have a real experience with God at all. Basically grew up on church. My dad wasn't opposed to it. Was a Christian man. We just didn't go to church. And what eventually happened was when I graduated high school, my whole dream was to do this marching percussion thing professionally. There's something called Drum Corps International, and it's basically a circuit like the NBA or Major League Baseball or something else, but for marching music. They call it Marching Music's Major League. And they have corps that are based all around the country. Drum and Bugle Corps is what it's called. So they have teams that are basically based all around the country, and people from around the world compete for 135 spots on each corps. And so my burden was, and my life goal was to be a member of one of these drum corps. There was one in Dubuque, Iowa called the Colts Drum and Bugle Corps. And I auditioned there twice while I was in high school, made first cut, but didn't make it both times. So my dad, unbeknownst to me, 9/11 woke him up to his need of his Lord spiritually, and he wasn't ready to meet his Lord. And I had no clue. I'm a lost kid. I'm just a mess, getting all kinds of foolishness, and I just didn't know any better. He started watching TV ministries and things like that to begin, and so my dad finds Jesus, and I had no idea. I was just living for myself, being a fool. And so when I graduated high school in 2004, around August of that year, right after I graduated, my dad started showing me love in a way that I'd never experienced before. And it wasn't because he didn't love me before or ever doubted his love for me. I thought he was a great, loyal father. I wouldn't ask for anyone different. I loved him, and I knew he loved me. But it was because God was living in this man's heart and loving me through him. And it was this divine transaction that was the only thing that would have reached me in that condition. I have a picture here of him, kind of proud of him, good-looking guy. And so my dad, my love languages are quality time and physical touch. And he started just showering me with these. And again, it wasn't I was deprived of them before, but just God was in the mix. And I knew that I wanted what my dad had. I couldn't fully explain all of what was going on, but I knew that what he had found was what I was looking for my whole life. And so I started watching TV ministries and started to realize immediately my desperate need of God and that I was a mess like that, and I couldn't fix the stuff that I was wrestling with. But what eventually ended up happening was in December of 2004, I went to audition for the Colts Drum and Bugle Corps again. And this time I was actually offered a contract. I was offered a position as a snare drummer. And so now I'm in this really difficult position because the call of God is leading one direction, but then my dreams are moving in another. And I'm at a crossroads and I have to make a decision. And unfortunately, I made the wrong choice. In my mind, I rationalized and thought, God will still be here in 3 years. I still love God. I still want to, get to know him. But I can't let go of something that means so much to me. Won't he understand? And so I spent 3 years marching in the Colts Drum and Bugle Corps. The first year I marched, I was a snare drummer. I'm the person in the middle there in the front row. This is at the Foxborough Stadium, or the Gillette Stadium in Foxborough, Massachusetts for the New England Patriots. So DCI Finals is at NFL stadiums. It could be in a college stadium. It kind of rotated every year. So that's the first year I marched. The top 12 corps get into World Championships. We were 13th. The second year that I marched, we were 13th again, and the second year I was a drum major. And then the last year that I marched in 2000, I think this is actually a Yamaha ad that goes in a lot of music instrument magazines and stuff. I'm the guy in the middle there again. So they had us in these ads and stuff for Yamaha. But the last year that I marched, I was the head drum major, and I think this is at Arizona State University Stadium. But DCI Finals is actually in Pasadena, not too far from here, at the Rose Bowl. So we got 10th place the last year that I marched, and it was an amazing experience, but it wasn't what God wanted for me, and I was kind of having this tension of doing something I knew that God didn't want me to do, but at the same time, it's all I ever wanted. I couldn't imagine life without it. My whole life was built upon trying to do this.
So you knew that you couldn't do them both at the same time, meaning you couldn't have a relationship with God and you couldn't be in drumline.
I couldn't be fully surrendered to God. So like I would read my Bible, I would pray, but it just wasn't, because the call of God was leading in one direction, and I was choosing to ignore that call while trying to be a follower of God to do what I wanted to do. That was kind of that tension.
It almost seems like the drum became the snare.
Yeah, pun intended. And that's brilliant, Reed. Thank you for that. It's exactly what it was. And for me, I couldn't envision happiness in following God if I couldn't do what I wanted. And I think many of us fall into that snare at times. And so that was kind of my story. But in the fall of 2000, after my first season, and I'll move on, but after my first season, my dad sits me down in his bedroom, and in tears he confesses to me that he had failed me as a father spiritually. In finding, now my dad couldn't give me what he didn't receive, but he realized his accountability to God as a father spiritually, and he realized that the reason why I was such a mess growing up was because I didn't have that grounding spiritually in the midst of chaos with my mom and other things. And it wrecked him. And so my dad literally apologizes to me and says, I failed you as a father spiritually, and I'm sorry. Will you forgive me, and how have I hurt you? And it was one of the most profound moments of my life. And I remember thinking to myself, why is my dad crying? Like, he's the best dad I could have hoped for. Why is it that he's crying? I came to better appreciate and understand it later, and I learned a lesson that day, that God's call upon my life as a man is to take responsibility. And the easy thing for my dad to do at that stage was to just move on as if, that didn't happen and do better going forward. But he didn't do that. He went back to where he had messed up, and he owned it like a man. And that taught me that I can't run from my mistakes as a man. My responsibility, and as any role, not just a man, but as a leader, my role is to take responsibility come what may. And that meant the world to me. And I didn't appreciate it as much as I could have then, but I certainly appreciate it now. And so that was another situation that's really rocked me. After my second season of marching, I was teaching the drumline at my old high school in the off season and working in retail. I never went to college. And my students were doing well each year that I taught, plus I was starting to have success in drum corps. So success and the fulfillment of my dreams is what I'm thinking will really get me somewhere, but the relationship ended up falling apart, and I didn't find what I was looking for there anyway, in the deepest wounds of my heart. And I wasn't finding it in success either. Even though I'm performing in front of thousands of people, there's still this emptiness that isn't finding that void being filled. But in the fall of 2006, where I grew up was about a half hour from 3ABN World Headquarters. And for 21 years, I had never heard of a Seventh-day Adventist. Never heard of the church, never heard of anyone that was an Adventist. I actually went to school with one, I didn't know it. Had no clue, completely foreign to me. But my dad started watching 3ABN. He had heard about the station being open some years ago because it's kind of a local thing that people had heard about. I hadn't. And we started watching 3ABN. He started watching it first, then encouraged me to watch. And the first thing I saw was Doug Batchelor's Most Amazing Prophecy series that he did in Berrien Springs. And I remember thinking to myself, never heard that before, but that's what the text says. And then the state of the dead, or the Sabbath, or the Ten Commandments, or whatever. And I thought, I never heard that before either, but that's what the text says. And this process just kind of continued of feeling like, well, what else haven't I been told? And because I wasn't really church growing up, it wasn't like I was centered in doctrine. You know, it wasn't like I was rooted in this belief or that belief, and it was hard to let go of per se. I had those beliefs to some degree, but it wasn't like I had my whole life sold into them. I had no stereotypes about Adventists, which was to my benefit, really. But I just went through this experience and thought, that's interesting. So I marched my last season of drum corps. We get 10th place in the world at the Rose Bowl, as high as I could get, you know, as far as my view. And then my students have an undefeated season. And so they get the highest score of the day in any class that competed that day at every show. And so success is showing up. I get promoted to leadership, to management and retail. But then my dad pulls me aside around Thanksgiving of 2007 and says, buddy, this Sabbath thing's either true or it's not. What are you going to do? It wasn't mean, but it's just, he was right. Like, what am I going to do with the things that I'm learning? Yes.
So he was already living according to it.
He was. He actually left his job in management and retail to invest in me because he realized that he had failed me spiritually and nothing was more important to him than me being reached, and he would be available as much as he could. And it cost us everything because I drug my feet. We eventually were homeless. That's a whole other story that happened later. But anyway, it's just an amazing story of how his love for me and his commitment to me, had I not had that during the dark times that we went through, I don't think I would have stayed in. But because I had someone with me the whole time, it meant the world to me. So I learned a lot from the example of my dad of what the love of God truly is. One, experiencing it for real through a person, not just hearing about it, but living it, experiencing it, and receiving it. But two, completely giving up everything to ensure that I would be saved. Those principles and taking responsibility radically changed my life through the example of my dad. So I started keeping Sabbath. Now just imagine, if field shows for the drumline that I'm teaching, I aged out a drum corps, so I'm done with that. Though the corps offered me positions to work there multiple times, I told them no. But imagine working in management and retail and then teaching drumline in high school. Field shows are on Saturdays and football games are on Friday nights. And this is around Thanksgiving time that I tell my employers, so I'm not going to work on Friday nights or Sabbaths anymore. Imagine how that's going to go over in management and retail going into the holiday season. It didn't go over well. So what ended up happening was they tried to accommodate to some degree, but because I was an assistant manager, I wasn't the main manager. But still, like, there were some Sabbaths I had to work, and in my mind I'm thinking, well, you know, God will understand because I'm trying to keep the Sabbath most of the time. But he convicted me, I'm asking for all of you, not part of you. So in August of 2008, I eventually left my retail involvements and left there. But what happened before that was I was working in retail in the spring of 2008, and I get a phone call one day, and the voice is familiar, and I said, you'll have to forgive me, but this wouldn't happen to be John Lomacang, would it? He's the pastor of the Thompsonville Church at 3ABN. He's one of the main personalities there. And he says, yeah. I said, you know, I've seen you on TV. I love it when you sing. And so anyway, he comes to the store, and I say, you know, I think what you guys are teaching is amazing. My friends think I'm crazy, but I don't think I'm crazy. Do you think I'm crazy? And anyway, I was just excited, and I can tell he kind of had this glimmer in his eye of, got him, you know, like low-hanging fruit. He's a young person. He's excited. And so he invites me to the church, and I eventually go, and he pulls me up front on stage at one point. His wife was so sweet to me. She let me sit with her because I don't know what these people do in a church service. I've never been to an Adventist church. I'll just kind of watch them and do what they do. So she takes me to the New Believers Bible class, Sabbath school, and then she lets me, you can sit with me, and this is Dee, he's new here. It was just so sweet to me. And so Pastor Lomacang gets on up front and says, come up here, Dee. And I was like, I'm an introvert, so I have zero desire to be in front of people, in front of cameras, any of that. It's just horrifying to me. So I go up front, and he says that this young man is going to do evangelism in Carbondale. Now, I thought this guy's out of his mind because one, I'm an introvert, have no desire to be a public speaker. And two, I'm not an evangelist. Like, I don't even know what I'm doing, man. Like, and I don't like Carbondale. It's a rival town to where I grew up. So I'm totally sure this guy misspoke.
Like O for O.
Yeah, like this guy is just, this old man's crazy. He doesn't know what he's talking about. He's just lost the plot. Well, what ends up happening is about 3 years after he says this, I end up being the personal ministries coordinator for the Carbondale Seventh-day Adventist Church. As a Seventh-day Adventist, I wasn't baptized yet. I wasn't a member of the church. And so what he said actually ended up being prophetic, though he didn't know any better at the time. So in the fall of 2008, I leave my jobs, eventually invest in a guy I met at that church, an elderly gentleman, took care of him. Then when he passed away, I tried to go to Arise and then I tried to go to AFCO, but both doors closed in 2008. Then I ended up taking care of this guy. Then in 2009, I get a job in emergency management, which is kind of like the county government equivalent of FEMA. So they're overseeing the plans, the training, the accreditation, search and rescue stuff, those types of things. They coordinate all the resource ordering during disasters at a county government level through the AmeriCorps Vista program, which is kind of like the domestic Peace Corps. And so that's what I did for a year. This church eventually ends up just investing in me and blessing me. I'm not a member yet. The pastor of the church was Romanian, was just an amazing guy, invited me to his house for lunch one day. Now, I was not acquainted with Adventist hospitality at this stage. And when I went to a Baptist church, I didn't get it either. I just was there and left. So it was just unique to me that I didn't really know how to respond, that this guy invites me to his house. My first thought was, you're a pastor. Like, this is a very important person. Why would he want me in his home? It just meant so much to me that he would do that. So he invites me to his house. His wife makes this amazing Romanian bread. And then there's these like hot dog looking things. And I remember when I ate them, it was absolutely disgusting. I have no idea what it was. It was the most disgusting thing I'd ever had. I thought, I don't know what that is, but that's not a hot dog. And to this day, I'm assuming that thing still exists and I've never had it since. It could be the beloved Big Frank, but I don't know. I'm hoping not.
Careful.
Yeah, I know, stepping on toes here in this area of the country. But anyway, but I'll do anything out of principle, generally. I couldn't finish it. It was just weird to me. But he just kept investing in me, and some of the church members go to 3ABN camp meeting. It's like 4 hours from where I was living. So we go, and I get there. David Ashrick is going to speak, and he was the other big person that was a big draw to me to Adventism. Because he was a young person, he made Adventism look fun. His story was similar to mine. A relationship didn't fill him, fame didn't fill him, and I could just kind of relate to his story. And actually, the restoration series he did here in 2004, I found on the internet, and is one of the biggest reasons I became a Seventh-day Adventist. And so restoration is a very special place in my heart for that very reason. And so anyway, David was a big deal to me too, coming into the message. So David's about to speak, and Angie Lomacang finds me, and she says, "Oh, it's so good that you're here. Where are you now?" So I tell her, and she's like, "Hey, David Ashrick's here. He's going to speak today." And I was like, "Yeah, he's speaking next." "He's speaking next? Well, what are you doing sitting back here?" It's like, "I don't want to be on TV. I don't have to look over anyone's head." And she's like, "No, you need to come up front." It's like, "Nah, I really don't want to." No, you need to come up front." It's like, "I prefer not." She says, "No, come with me." So she makes me go up front, and they've already filled all the seats, generally at this stage, so they don't have any empty ones in front of the camera. And there's one open seat, and she says, "Is anyone sitting here? Good, sit down." She didn't even wait for an answer. So I sit, and in the middle of the message, David points to me and says, "What's your name?" I'm thinking, this is exactly what I didn't want. Dee? Dee? I said, "Yeah, Dee." And then he starts, and the lady beside me, her name is Joan. And the sermon's called A Friend of God, I think, or The Friend of God. So David then starts using my name and her name as an illustration and kind of closes with it or whatever. And so I go talk to him after the fact. I was like, "Hey, that was cool, I guess." Anyway, I got questions about ministry. I believe this message is true, but I'm kind of wrestling with some stuff about things I'm seeing. Can you help me? It didn't work out, but I met someone else who eventually became a friend who went to Arise, and then God began a process that I won't have time to go into all the miracles that took place because there's tons of them. But God eventually opened a door for me to go to Arise.
You mentioned Arise, but
yeah.
Arise and AFCO. What are Arise and AFCO?
Arise and AFCO are basically schools of evangelism, evangelistic training programs that you take for about 4 months. So it's kind of an alternative to seminary. If you're like a lay person, you want to learn how to share your faith, then you can go back to your local vocation, be a Bible worker. Some people become pastors that way. And I really felt that God was leading me there. God opened the doors, provided the finances. And yeah, in December 4th of 2010, I was baptized. David baptized me at Arise. And then a week later, I graduated and basically went into ministry from then on, and have been in, ran a nonprofit for a while that was doing multicultural outreach, then taught at one of our academies, a self-supporting school. And then from there, went on to a media ministry called Unseen Media Group, was there for about 3 years, and then just took this position at the beginning of the year with the Adventist Review, ARTV, where I still travel and speak like I normally do for evangelism, but increase awareness, oversee our social media stuff, and we're helping to create content that's short, shareable, relevant, and modernly packaged in a way to reach people that aren't of our faith. And so that's kind of what I do for a living now, is traveling, speaking, and doing media stuff. But it's been a wild ride, but God is good. I wasn't looking for Him, He came looking for me, and it's radically changed my life. And I committed my life to communicating that love that reached me to people in our faith and out of our faith, that there's a God in heaven who's real, who has love for you individually, who places a high value on you individually. And every unique doctrine that we have as a Seventh-day Adventist Church, I believe, tells part of the story of God's love for us. And so I try to highlight that, whatever it is I may be covering. So I share it from experience, not from any political persuasion. It was just, that's what reached me as a messed up kid, and I know it can reach anybody. So that's why I'm here, and that's what I do.
I thought it very interesting that as you were telling your story, that there were multiple times in this journey that you took into becoming more familiar with Seventh-day Adventism, that it really was the personal hospitality that was shown to you from your dad to John Lo McCain to, you know, that pastor. Those are the things that stuck out to me in your story, that you were so surprised by the hospitality, even you saw a change in your dad physically as to what he was showing you, and to like a personal father-son relationship. And that was what really, it was surprising to you, and then made you want to learn more. Would you say?
100%. For me, Christianity was largely caught and not taught. I experienced the love of God first, and then I found that Adventism was true, but I had this initial, not hesitation per se, I did to some degree. I wrestled with the idea of Ellen White being a prophet, and because though I met some individual instances, I also had some other instances where I just felt like I was lost amongst the crowd, and my questions weren't being answered. But when I was at Arise, those questions were able to be answered. The church members of the local church there loved evangelism. They were so supportive of us students. They brought us in their homes, and that component to me was just amazing, that people would open their home to 50 people. There were 49 of us when I went to Arise. And this couple, they would bring us into their home on Friday nights to have, you know, Vespers worship there. They'd cook food for us. I just thought, why would they do that? Because I'd never had experienced that. And so when I found the love of God, and then I found the truth of Adventism, what I was looking to see was, where's that won me in this movement that I believe is true? And at Arise, I found that I could find a doctrinal package that I'd already known was true, but I could find the love of God in the midst of that doctrinal package. That was what was so transformative for me, for sure, was genuine Christians. Nathan Renner was a phenomenal pastor. He nurtured his congregation. They were evangelistic in nature. Seeing Adventism work, right? Not just believing that it was true, but seeing it work evangelistically, and seeing the love of God in the movement, that's what anchored me. And I realized, this is it. I'm in it to win it. I'm not going anywhere. This is what I've been looking for all along.
I think that's interesting because I believe there are quite a few people out there who mistakenly believe that God's doctrine and His law can be separate from His love. They don't realize that it's one and the same thing.
That's
but
right.
the Bible tells us it's one and the same thing. God is love. It's not loving, He's love. So I would say that it seems in your journey it was easiest because you saw it. And then learned intellectually what it was.
Generally, some people, they may be in the periphery of Adventism their whole life, but never knew how God loved them and valued them individually. That's never been a question for me. So like I've never had to wrestle with unhealthy pictures of God coming into Adventism. I never had that. But I've had to counsel countless people who have been in that situation. But because I had that experience, it was kind of the hermeneutic. It was the lens through which I read Scripture. was that God indeed is love, and that God has standards and expectations, 100%. We're not downplaying that. But all those are couched in love. Paul says that love is the fulfillment of the law in Romans. So it just, though that component made sense to me coming in. And so a lot of what I'm doing in my preaching and teaching and mentoring and discipling is just helping people to see that perspective shift. It's not that all these things that God expects, don't worry about it, it doesn't matter. I never say that. My point that I make to people is every bit of it's couched in love. And if God has love for you and God cares about you and He asks things of you, that must mean that He believes, one, that you could succeed in it, and two, that He's promising to provide the means necessary to succeed through the power of His Holy Spirit to a surrendered heart. So that's kind of been my burden, per se, in Adventism, is to keep making those things clear while not downplaying what God expects.
One of my favorite verses is found in Jeremiah, I think it's 31, talking about, I have loved thee with an everlasting love, therefore with loving kindness I have drawn thee. And when you're speaking about that, it just reminds me so much of how you really don't need to do much. God's just going to take you by the hand and lead you where you need to be.
Yeah.
If you're willing, he can take you. There's no bounds to where He can take you.
Yeah.
So it's kind of awesome to hear your story of where you started and where you've gone. It just, do you feel like you knew that going, like while you were going through it, or is it in hindsight?
It did draw me for sure. Christ said, if I be left, will draw them in. And later in that chapter, He says that He will write His law in our hearts and our minds in Jeremiah 31, that He will empower us to do what He expects. So that certainly was the case for me. Yeah, that draw was what won me. When I was stealing at the age of 5, I was lying perpetually. I was just a mess as a kid. I couldn't sit still. They put me on Ritalin, had all of that. And it was indeed the love of God for me that drew me. And I realized that He's real, He cares, and I'm in. Yeah.
So something that I wanted to ask was your dad obviously seemed very open to doctrines as he was revealed to them. Did he end up getting baptized Seventh-day Adventist as well?
He's not a member of the church, but he believes the message 100%, yeah. So he's still on a journey too, and not all of our experiences were positive, which kind of made that process a little harder. But we have believed 100% in the truth of this message, and yeah, he's in it to win it still, and supports me in what I do.
Oh, praise God.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's amazing what God can do, and you've shown us that because came from being an introvert, well, still an introvert.
Yeah.
Still an introvert, but amazing how your dreams and your goals can change.
Yeah.
Because God changes them and transforms your heart. And so, you know, I think it's great because you started off as your dream was drums.
Right.
And you were at the height of, or at least a very, very high height of your success.
Yeah.
And left that because God had another dream for you.
Yeah.
And now that's your dream.
Amen.
It's amazing how He can change our hearts. So
Yeah,
thank you so much for coming and sharing that wonderful testimony. And we want to thank our viewers for watching as well. We'd like to ask for your prayers for the show, for iTestify. If you'd like to donate, if you were inspired by what you heard today, you can go to LLBN.tv. And we'd like to pray for you too, that your light will so shine and you may glorify your Father which is in heaven. Till next time.